Unfortunately, what the stats show us around the country is the average American John is white, middle class, middle age, he's married, he has children. This is the dad next door.
In an isolated area of Monticello, Minnesota, in the fall of 1993, a dog dragged home a human forearm and hand. When the owner discovers the gruesome sight on their front doorstep, a 6-mile search of the county begins.
A study we did here in Minnesota of 20 women showed 3/4 reported assault. The general public is not aware of the amount of abuse.
When it was learned the remains were of 31-year-old Martha Bacon, a woman with a checkered past, sensitivity in our community diminished, and a media frenzy in Minneapolis ensued. In this episode of Aren't You the Girl, I'll be covering the Wright County homicide cold case of Martha Bacon, along with the St. Paul homicide case of Bone Lake Jane Doe. On October 15, 1993, a woman stumbled upon their dog gnawing on a human elbow. The shocked owner calls Wright County police, and an extensive search begins, but not much more is found. The Minnesota BCA used fingerprints to identify the victim as 31-year-old Martha Ann Bacon, who was living in Brooklyn Park at the time of her death. She had no rings or any other identifying factors. No missing person report was filed. Wright County investigators worked with University of Minnesota geologists to see if the soil found underneath her fingernails came from the soil found in Silver Creek Township. On 3 different occasions over the course of a couple of months, house dogs retrieved more body parts of Martha's that would ignite a new search of swampy areas in the county, all within a 1/4 mile from each other. Beyond the area around the housing development, Lake Maria State Park and an adjacent wildlife preserve were also searched. The only body parts that were never recovered were her torso, an arm, and a hand. Absolutely no trauma to her head was visible at all. The cuts could have been severed with a hacksaw. Wright County and Minneapolis police worked on Martha's case along with BCA agents, and there's never been enough evidence to make an arrest on someone. Since her remains were found in the same area where Belinda Van Lith went missing almost 20 years earlier, police suspect Timothy Crosby is a strong possibility. Timothy lived in St. Paul most of his life. He usually picked up hitchhikers or sex workers to abduct. His parents owned a cabin near Silver Creek where Tim had open access to bring his victims at any time. This cabin was still owned by the Crosby family in 1993. One documented sexual assault in December of 1974. Tim took the victim to the cabin and 2 other nearby areas, telling her he had killed and dismembered a girl before, that she's no different. Martha's remains were found within this location, suggesting that it was familiar to someone. Hard to just stumble upon it for a dumping ground. The Wright County police and investigators treated Martha's case and family with dignity and respect. The same couldn't be said about our community and how we wrote about her. One gruesome headline took up a page that read, "Arm found by dog was prostitutes." Readers write in saying, "You made a moral judgment," a brutal headline that takes away the sadness. It says, "Oh well, she was a..." What can you expect? To identify her as a prostitute is to hang guilt on her and tell the reader is what she deserved, while also telling the community to not be fearful, which the women should have been. We had a serial killer in our backyards. It's distressing to us that this is not being taken seriously, and seriously to us means more than we're working on it. Evelina Giobi from Whisper. Whisper is a national organization based in St. Paul. It educates the public about sex work and tries to help women escape from the sex industry. Giobi is a survivor of sex work, the leader of the organization, and was an advocate for Martha, along with several other women who lived and died in similar ways in the 1990s. Martha's case drew lots of media and TV coverage in the Twin Cities, with helicopter shots of the search efforts. Just not a lot of reporting was put into the fact that Martha was one of many women to be murdered in a short amount of time. From the beginning of 1992 to Martha's death in October 1993, many sex workers were found dead in Minneapolis. Whisper compiled and released a list of 8 women murdered within that time frame alone. Here's a quick summary of what became of those cases today. 2 have been solved with different perpetrators. I couldn't find any current or old information on victims Brenda Kuagan and May Catherine Young, so no update on the status of those cases. Martha's case, along with Linda Priebe, Leanne Blomquist, and Eden Young, are still unsolved and cold, making 4 out of the 8 cases still unsolved today. Maybe even 2 more cases unsolved. Whisper decided to release the names of these women to the newspapers in 1995 to try to raise concern. They were upset by the lack of alarm from the police and the public. GOB said, "I don't care if it's 1 person or 10. Someone is killing women in Minneapolis, blatantly and boldly, and it's picking on the most vulnerable women. And the public apathy is sickening. The silence is defeating." To understand where society was in 1993 regarding sex workers, we need to understand a very talked about woman in America at that time, Aileen Wuornos. Aileen, while engaging in sex work along the highways in Florida, shot dead 7 of her male clients, claiming she was acting in self-defense. The reason I bring Aileen up is because society was so obsessed with her in the early 90s, especially during and after her 1992 trial. This was truly the first time mainstream media got such a brutal, intimate look into the life of a sex worker. While some sympathized with Aileen, others couldn't believe she could kill so many men. But it created this opening of a great conversation to be had in society. Around the US in 1993, thousands of men were targeting sex workers specifically. But the media only cared to hear about the one sex worker who killed 7 men. So imagine how hard it must have been in 1993 to get media attention or even sympathy for your loved one who fell in that path and was taken away brutally. The conversation wasn't really there yet for Martha and every other victim mentioned in this episode. GOB appeared on an episode of The Geraldo Show in March 1993, sharing her insight into the reality of sex work and how that plays into Aileen's crimes. GOB took full advantage of this opening of dialogue to try to educate the public.
Evelina Giobbi's on the phone now. She's the founder of a group that helps prostitutes quit the business, a group called Whisper.
Women in prostitution are commonly sexually assaulted, raped, battered, and robbed by customers. A study we did here in Minnesota showed 3/4 reported assault. More than half were raped by a customer. Almost 80% were beaten by customers. 3/4 of them were robbed by customers. Showed that in police sting operations, often customers go to prostitutes and they're armed with guns. So I think what Lee is talking about is not uncommon, although the general public is not aware of the amount of abuse. This is not only against street prostitutes. Just recently in the Twin Cities, a brothel, a sauna, if you will, was broken into by 4 armed men. They kidnapped a woman, held her for 8 hours, and gang raped her. And we'll never know if Chief Humphreys, in fact, did attack Aileen, although the stats tell us that it's quite possible, or if she perceived it in the same way, Geraldo, that a Vietnam vet who suffers from post-traumatic stress disorder may perceive a threat, when in fact it just triggers something. We also know that right now that there's a serial murderer at large in Florida. 8 women are dead. 8 women in prostitution are dead. These are unsolved murders.
Yeah, usually it is the prostitute who is the victim.
In 1996, serial killer Gregory Klepper, also known as the Southside Strangler, was arrested in Chicago. Klepper at one time was a suspect in 15 unsolved cases against women, ranging from 1990 to 1996. He admitted to killing up to 40 women, but was charged with strangling 8 women throughout Chicago's South Side. He's serving 80 years for the murder of one woman, 30-year-old Patricia Scott. Klepper lived in St. Paul from December 1994 to July of 1995. He was wanted on a number of rape charges around that time. Though the time frame in which he lived in the Twin Cities was after Martha's murder, his relatives confirmed that he traveled back and forth from Chicago before then, which is why the police eventually looked at him as a possible suspect. Wright County Sheriff Donald Hozempa cleared Klepper in the killing and dismemberment of Martha Bacon in newspapers, saying it didn't fit his MO. Hozempa was more interested in possibly linking him with the death of Victoria Morris, who will be covered in the next episode. After this, in 1996, Martha's case went cold, at least from the public. In 2009, a DNA sample was taken from Martha's parents. Martha's remains were cremated in 1993, and no sample was ever taken. Wright County then entered Martha as a missing person in databases in case the rest of her remains are located. Timothy Crosby has never publicly been named a suspect in Martha's murder, though she is mentioned in his 2009 search warrant. Whatever became of Martha's investigation today is unknown. She isn't featured in any public database and has absolutely no digital presence. Most of my information I found from going through microfilm at the Wright County Historical Society. Also, author and friend Christine Hewsome, who is a national best-selling author for her true crime books and also worked with the Wright County Police Department, helped with adding her input into Martha's case. Her book, Buried in Wolf Lake, was loosely inspired by Martha's case. It's a case she would love to see solved. So who exactly was Martha Bacon? Researching Martha, I felt great sadness for her and for what her family has gone through. When I was younger, a relative of mine in another state was murdered and dismembered. Its brutality is shocking. I tried my best to paint Martha's case with as much dignity as she deserves. Martha did have a lengthy history with sex work, but she also had a family who cared for her. They had a private ceremony while requesting memorials be sent to the Humane Society, her home free shelter at Plymouth, which is a domestic violence center Martha had been part of. Martha was unmarried and had no children. She was living with a man in Brooklyn Park for several months at the time of her death. Martha left her home on September 26th or 27th and met with a male friend early in the morning. She said she would meet him again after work, but she never showed up. Martha Ann Bacon was last seen at 1 p.m. on September 27th, 1993, in the area of 21st and Aldrich Avenue North, Minneapolis. Martha was white, 5 foot 6 inches, 140 pounds, had medium-length blonde hair and blue eyes. Last seen wearing blue jeans, Reebok tennis shoes, and a windbreaker in North Minneapolis. Her remains were found in Silver Creek Township, about 40 miles west from where she was last seen. She was also known as Marty Bacon, Lisa Bacon, or Lisa Martin, and had lived in Plymouth, Minneapolis, Michigan, and Texas. Anyone who has any information on her homicide needs to come forward to the Wright County Police Department or Minnesota Crime Stoppers at 1-800-222-8477. We convince ourselves that women have chosen to be prostitutes and have consented to sexual exploitation so that we can distance ourselves from them. Evelina Giobbe. Though others may be connected to the killings in Minneapolis, there were other body parts found, and to this day, their identity is still unknown. This case is eerily similar to Martha's and occurred only 3 months before Martha disappeared. And honestly, I'm very shocked this case was never spoken about publicly in the 1990s with the other cases I talked about in this episode. On the morning of June 12, 1993, a man was walking along the shore of Bone Lake in New Scandia Township and discovered what he thought was the head of a mannequin floating in the water. Upon realizing it was a human head, he called the police. Nothing else was found in the area. Her foot was later recovered on the banks of Pig's Eye Lake, approximately 20 miles southwest in St. Paul. An extensive search yielded no other clues nor body parts. 9 days after the discovery of her head and foot, Washington County received a call. A man on the other end said he killed the woman and left her body under Mendota Bridge near the Minnesota River. The police searched this area for 8 hours before the river began flooding and they were forced to call off the search. The man called back and said the woman is from Wisconsin and that he was very sorry the police did not find the rest of her. He called on a tip line, and police hoped he would call back with a more specific location. He never did. Police say the tip sounded real, and it was the only tip they got. This case is referred to as the Bone Lake Jane Doe. In 2022, her case was submitted to the DNA Doe Project in hopes to find her identity. She was between the ages of 30 to 65 years old. She had dark brown spiky hair and brown eyes. Ears were triple pierced, though she was not wearing jewelry, had on red nail polish on 2 toenails. If you have any information regarding the Bone Lake Jane Doe, please contact the Ramsey County Medical Examiner Office at 651-266-1700. While doing my research into the cases from Whisper back in 1994, one case stood out that is still unsolved today, the case of Eden Young, 1992. Her body was found in Washington County, the same as Bone Lake Jane Doe. Unfortunately, not much is known about Martha Bacon, or any victim I've mentioned in this episode, and there were many, and a majority are still unsolved, with no cold case unit in Minneapolis to work these cases. If anyone has any information regarding Martha Bacon or Bone Lake Jane Doe, please come forward. I would love to learn more about Martha and her story, and I would love for a family to find their missing loved one. Next week's episode, I'll be covering the homicide of Victoria Morris and the official dive into the life and crimes of Timothy Crosby. For sources on today's episode, along with photos of Martha and sketches of Bone Lake Jane Doe, please go to www.aren'tyouthegirl.com. Also follow on social media to stay connected. Thank you for listening. Stay safe, everyone.